Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots. Bootlickers, shills, deaths, slaves, serfs, peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks, insurrectionists. I'm useful today. Welcome. And yesterday was the anniversary of the so-called January 6th insurrection, and I wanted to discuss that a little bit because it wasn't an insurrection. It was a riot, and certainly they were trespassing, and there was a certain amount of violence, but under any normal classification of insurrection, it wasn't. And there's plenty of great historical examples. Japan, 1937, for one, where there was an attempted coup. And so the elements of an attempted coup in an insurrection are completely absent in this situation. There's no coordination in planning. There was no pre-planning. There was no renegade military units involved. There was no members of the government that were co-opted as part of it. There was no massive arming. There was no real attempt to stop the transition of power. All of these things that would be a component of an actual insurrection. It was a bunch of rowdy protesters who were inflamed and then got involved in a riot, and and certainly trespassing was illegal. It was an unfortunate incident, but the way it's characterized by the Democrats and their faithful rodent minions in the media is just astounding. And there's a number of elements to this too that serve them, but I'll get to that in a minute. But so the crowd was not really armed. I mean, certainly some people were beaten with crutches, and some people used bear spray and mace and the like. And in the mythology that's created, people believe that a lot of people died that day, and that's what the liberal base believes, and that's what the politicians and the media keep spouting. And there was two fatalities. One was a police officer who was hit with a fire extinguisher and later died in the hospital of a heart attack. So that doesn't really qualify in the context of this narrative. And one element that does was a trigger-happy Capitol policeman who shot Ashley Babbitt. And so that was one fatality. But once again, to characterize this as an insurrection is a carefully manufactured and manipulated massage narrative to be used by the state, and they certainly have. And the kind of outrageous hyperbole and histrionics that are attached to it. People in the media talking about that it's comparable to Pearl Harbor and World War II and the Holocaust is just beyond belief. And just like I pointed out about comparisons to Hitler, it really degrades the solemnity and value of those actual events. World War II, where 70 million people died, and the Holocaust, where 4 to 10 million people died, and the dramatic incident at Pearl Harbor, of course. To compare this riot with those events is just so outrageous and so hyperbolic. It's just beyond belief. And so they've carefully manufactured this narrative for 4 years, and they milk it for all it's worth, and they constantly bring it up. And now I want to get into some of the things that are a little deeper about this. One of them is, of course, this is a demonization of populism. It's supposed to be the people's house, and some protesters went there. It turned into a riot. And so this is a really easy way to demonize populism, particularly Trump supporters and conservative populism. Of course, what would the narrative be if there was a leftist riot? It would be a completely topsy-turvy narrative of what we're hearing now. And then also this idea, it also creates this idea that the government and the American people are the victims of this incident. And they're not. The rioters certainly are the victims of this. So we have the government and all the intelligence and police agencies going after everybody that was involved or talked about being involved on January 6th. People that weren't even there have been arrested. And so they've rounded up 1,000 people and put them with hefty prison sentences for basically trespassing. And yet these same police agencies and the government have difficulty going after anybody involved with BLM riots and then the wave of migrant crime now. They can't really do anything about that, but they sure are thorough about going after 1,000 trespassers. And of course, tens of thousands of hours of January 6 footage have been revealed, showing that the narrative has been fueled by very dramatic photographs and video footage of the storming of the building. But once people got in, they were very polite. They even stayed within the velvet barriers as if they were tourists. And Capitol Police were showing them around. There was no violence. It was more like tourists and sightseeing. And so that goes a long way in showing, once again, this is not an insurrection. Oh, let's also remember that there was no dream of having a coup d'etat and taking over the government. We have a vastly armed nuclear power, for God's sakes, as Biden pointed out. You know, they can't challenge the government because they have F-16s. The idea that this rowdy crowd would go after storm the Capitol with any dreams of toppling the government or challenging the election is just ridiculous. And the other point of this too is that they weren't trying to stop the transition of power. They were just trying to delay the certification of the election until it had been investigated, and that was Trump's point too. Another point about this so-called insurrection is it's been proven beyond a doubt that Trump had nothing to do with it. He told the people to go forward in peace. He never instigated anything. He never planned anything. He was never part of it. And in fact, as we now know, he requested the National Guard be there on that day just in case things got out of hand, which they did. And we also have Nancy Pelosi on tape admitting that she denied the request to have National Guard there, and all these other little stories about Trump having his limo turned around so he could be there for the insurrection are all proven false. So the whole narrative is just a bunch of garbage. And there was no insurrection. There was no coup d'etat. Trump is not an insurrectionist. It's all bullshit. And I want to take it a step further because, as in the title, about statist mythologies. And it's just amazing to see how the media and the politicians can get together and create this mythology. And now it's a standard part of American mythology. And they've milked it for everything it was worth for the last 4 years, and they will continue to do so. And we have lots of examples of this. A good example of that is the assassination of Martin Luther King, and now Martin Luther King is co-opted to be used by the state. It doesn't matter that the state at the time persecuted, spied on, and probably ultimately had Martin Luther King killed. And now they have co-opted it and created a statist mythology. And they love to create Martin Luther King. They talk about him in reverential terms. And he's part of the statist mythology. It's really unfortunate. It's pretty telling that they didn't co-opt Malcolm X after his assassination as part of the statist mythology, because they can take the words of Martin Luther King and co-opt them and utilize them to further the statist mythology. And that's just how it goes. And another example of that is there's certain schools of thought that challenge the idea that a plane crashed in Shanksville on 9/11. And there's a lot of evidence out there. Of course, it's gone now, but you can still dig up some of these documentaries that show there's a good reason to challenge the idea that a plane even ever crashed in Shanksville. And yet we have a memorial there now, and people go out there and act solemn and at this sacred spot. And once again, it's now part of the statist mythology. So that's one of the things I really find fascinating about history, is seeing all these different ways that statist mythology is created, and it tries to create this false nobility of the government and the kind of ideals they have, like they really cherish Martin Luther King and his ideas, and now the whole idea that somehow democracy was being challenged by a bunch of drunk rioters on January 6th, all of which, of course, wanted to get home in time for dinner that day. If it was an insurrection, it was the worst insurrection in history. So I guess that's all I want to say about January 6th, and I'm glad Trump is president now, so we won't end up with a January 6th federal holiday. I'm a useful idiot, don't you be one too, and I really mean it this time.